There she is. Supervisor Jenkins, you have 10 minutes. Yes. Yes, I should. Pay attention to the timekeeper. I'm sorry. Each speaker will have 10 to 12 minutes. We've decided 10 minutes is probably appropriate, after which we'll have some questions from the audience.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm delighted to be with you tonight to talk a little bit about something that I think I know something about. If you go back and look at the time I was appointed to the board in 1982 and just do a little arithmetic, you'll find that this is my 32nd budget for the county. So I hope that I've gained a lot of experience from that. And back about 6 months ago, seems like now, we had talked at the board level about what we were going to do on the budget this year. And we decided that, well, maybe it would be a good idea for us to start a lot earlier than we had been in the past. And so we did that. And as we plodded along about the middle of November, Chairman Stewart decided that he didn't really have a good handle on what the budget should be for this coming year, the fiscal year 14. So he sent a letter to all of the members of the Board of Supervisors along with his proposed budget. And while if I get this wrong, stop me. But with his proposed budget, and he asked us for our comments about what was in that proposed budget. And well, at that point in time, that gave me and the rest of the board members the opportunity to prepare our own versions of the budget. And so we started out to do that. And the first thing that I looked for when we started this process was, what are the critical unmet needs of the county? And that is what I used as a basis for my preparation of my budget. Now, it's quite true that the advertised rate yesterday was $1.196 for $100 of assessed value. That works out to about 3.59%, I hope, increase in taxes. I proposed a tax rate in my presentation of 1.2976, and that would have been a 4% tax rate, and it would have been enough money to take care of all of our unmet needs. And we'll talk about some of these unmet needs. I had a line item in that budget for 25 police officers. We have decimated our personnel stream, our stream of putting people back into the jobs that we need to critically fill. And I think that we need to rebuild the infrastructure of the county. And one of the ways to do that is to start and go back to where we were last year or year before and put the 25 police officers back into the budget. And then we ought to also look at the fire and rescue. I can tell you right now, I wouldn't like to be in the Gainesville district, folks, and have a heart attack. And I'll tell you, you have a career fire department out there, but it has some problems with staffing basic life support units. So I put 25 to 30 additional firemen and EMS personnel into my proposal. My proposal also included a 3% raise for county employees in the budget. I would not close any of the projected libraries, and no reduction in the support of our schools. I'd leave that at 56.75, and I would say that we need to accept the principles of sound financial management that we adopted several years ago. Voter registration was a huge disappointment for a lot of first-time voters this last time around, because when they went down to vote, they had to stand in lines that went in and out of buildings and around buildings, and that's just not acceptable. Now, we've appointed a commission to look into this, but it takes about $2.5 million. Actually, it's $2,120,000 to buy new voting machines. And we need to do that. The ones that the people have over in the registrar's domain now will not work. And if you have one break down, you can't get spare parts. So we need to go back and look at that contract and spend the $2,120,000 and update our voter registration procedures. I think we ought to fund all of the strategic priorities of the new strategic plan that the board has recently approved, and I'd be concerned about our community partnership funding for ACTS, SERVE, ARC, the preservation of historic sites, Keep Prince William Beautiful, and Project Menda House. We need to keep the Juvenile Court Services and Health Department funding where it is and not reduce that any. I do not agree that we ought to cut any parks. We really need parks. I'll tell you right now that I've heard people talking about building a new high school with a pool in it. Well, let me tell you, if you want to build a new high school and you want the taxpayers to pay for the pool, that's the way to do it. But I wouldn't do it that way. I'd build a new recreation center somewhere like we did with Dale City Rec Center and the Chin Center, and then I'd charge fees for the people that wanted to use it, and if the schools needed to use it, they could do the same thing that they're doing at the rec center, both Chin and Dale City. So I do not support putting swimming pools in high schools, having the taxpayers pay for that. I would not like to decrease our TRIP funds. Those are funds that each individual supervisor has available to him or her to work on transportation projects in his or her district and perhaps help some other supervisors in their district. We have $200,000 in the budget now. I would agree to bring that down to $125,000. I'd keep all the funding for substance abuse treatment. We cannot afford to send these kids to jail, and it's cost us more to keep them in jail than it does to treat them outside. So we ought to have the staff and the people in place to do treatment of substance abuse persons who are convicted of that problem. I would also not cut, and I'll tell you why, the VACO, NACO, and NVRC funding. We pay on a per capita basis a fee to both VACO and NACO and Northern Virginia Regional Commission for the privileges of being a member of those organizations. These are the best lobbying organizations, best organizations that you could have a good collection of local elected officials at, and if we don't belong to those organizations, we miss out on all of the planning and the approval actions that go on with regional projects. So we don't need to cut those associations. I'd keep all of the current holidays in place. No need to cut the holidays. These county employees, especially in fire and rescue and police department, don't get any time off the way it is now. And so if we keep cutting out the benefits, we're going to be competing with other counties that are not even worried about holidays, and we're going to lose our best talent to these other places. And that's what I mean when I talk about the erosion of the benefits for the employees. I would also keep all of the changes to the Flory Center, the small business center that we have working in the county, and there have been some proposals for cuts there, and I certainly don't agree with those proposals, and I believe that's probably the end of my 10 minutes here. Pretty close. So thank you for coming, and I didn't mean to ramble on, but thank you very much. I'll be here for questions.
Our next panelist is Jim Riley. He's an attorney and the Senior Director of Government Affairs for a National Trade Association. He's currently an op-ed columnist for Prince William Today, covering local issues, and he edits a conservative blog titled Virginia Virtucon. Mr. Riley is in his fourth term as president of the Southbridge Homeowners Association. Since the Rileys began calling the county home in 2001, he's served on the county's 2002 Citizen Road Bond Committee, the Cherry Hill Community Development Authority, and he's been the at-large representative on the county's Housing Board from 2010 to 2012. He has served in a number of roles in the Republican Party of Virginia. Jim, his wife Julia, and their children Jacqueline and Jimmy are members of St. Francis of Assisi Roman Catholic Church in Triangle. Mrs. Riley is a kindergarten teacher with the county public school system.
Good evening. Is it on? Okay. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Okay. Good evening. I'd like to thank the Committee of 100 for this opportunity to address the community on this topic of importance to all of us. My thanks also go out to Supervisors Covington and Jenkins and Dr. Lateef for joining me in this timely discussion. And thank you to Ms. Donaldson for moderating this event. We've been told that our property taxes have been going down. This is true from a certain point of view, as Obi-Wan Kenobi will put it. FY 2009 saw a significant spike in general property taxes. This is the date that the county uses as its benchmark to claim that they have lowered taxes. Why is that date significant? Because it was an anomaly based on the assessed values from the 2007 calendar year, the last year of the housing bubble. As a result, practically anything would look good in comparison. Yet total general property taxes for FY 2012 rank only behind FY 2009, despite home values remaining diminished and the housing construction sector lingering in the doldrums. The board should have reduced the tax rate in FY 2009 even more than they did, but instead chose to opt for the tax windfall that the height of the real estate bubble generated for them. Note here that the general property taxes are growing exponentially faster than the population. General property taxes are the more accurate barometer rather than total revenue, because general property taxes are what hit residents the hardest. Despite all the recognition of our county ranking among the top 10 wealthiest in the nation based upon median household income, the average weekly wage in the county is actually the third lowest in Northern Virginia, only $1 more than Fauquier County and $33 more than Manassas Park. Remember, the median is the number dead center between the top and bottom numbers, while the average is what you get when you total everything together and divide it by the number in the set. This tells me that there are a lot of people here who are struggling to make ends meet if our average is so significantly lower than the median. For all this, the county has managed to secure an average surplus of $31.4 million per year over the past 6 years. That is nearly $75 for every one of the 419,006 men, women, and children that the last U.S. Census determined are living in the county. $300 for the average family of 4. After a few years of such consistently large surpluses, you would think that someone would have caught on and adjusted the budget accordingly. Given the failure to do so, I am left with only two possibilities, neither of which I want to entertain. Either these surpluses are intentional, or they are the result of incompetence. Our first graders in the county are learning what the essential functions of local government are: parks, libraries, schools, roads, fire rescue, water management, home inspections, and police. Yet we leave many of these core services underfunded while we hand out money to equestrian centers and museums, not to mention performing arts centers that are supposed to be self-sufficient, but for which county taxpayers now find themselves on the hook indefinitely. Our residents are struggling financially, cutting back on life's extras as their paychecks shrink and gas prices soar. It is unconscionable that raising their county tax bills is even being considered. Some supervisors are even suggesting 10% or more tax increases to address unmet critical needs. Ironically, the total for such needs is less than what the average county surplus for the last 6 years has been. County government needs to learn lessons from the family budget. Meanwhile, our county's tax base remains disproportionately residential. We haven't even been able to meet the all-too modest goal of a 75%, 25% residential to commercial split. And that includes counting apartment complexes as commercial property rather than residential. I didn't come here to talk about tables, graphs, or pie charts, though. I came here to talk about pie. How do we grow our economic pie? Or better yet, how do we bake more pies? The Prince William Board of County Supervisors is currently debating the FY14 budget and what the corresponding property tax rate should be for residents. While the main focus on whether the rate should result in the average tax bill remaining level or increasing by nearly 4%, the real question at hand is what should the size and scope of our local government be going forward? What is not being discussed to the degree that it should be is the role that economic growth can play in the equation. Our county's over-reliance on residential housing, the retail and hospitality industries, and government has created an economic house of cards. A stiff wind, such as what sequestration will bring in just a matter of days, could bring it all tumbling down. Unlike the last-minute resolution to the year-end fiscal cliff crisis, it would be foolhardy to count on such a deal this time to avoid these budget cuts. Sequestration is going to happen. That is straight from 3 congressional committee chairmen I spoke with just 2 weeks ago. People I know are already getting furlough notices. A leading economic indicator that I have learned to pay close attention to is the delinquency rate for residents in my homeowners association. The reason for this is simple. One of the first things that people cut from their monthly budgets, even before entertainment expenses, is paying their HOA dues, since they figure that they will be able to catch up later with minimal consequences. Too often, though, that is the start of a slippery slope that usually ends with court dates and collections attorneys. The 2012 calendar year marks the worst delinquency rate that I've seen in my 10 years on our HOA board, even worse than the rates in 2008 and 2009, at the depth of the Great Recession. Needless to say, I was not surprised when I learned that the nation's gross domestic product for the fourth quarter of 2012 actually shrank by 0.1%. Then there's the news that Walmart is reporting this sales are, quote, a total disaster, unquote, and represent the worst start to a month in more than 7 years. Keep in mind, the definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters without economic growth, and we are heading in that direction. We can no longer simply copy what other surrounding counties are doing. They've been doing for years what we should have been doing all along. We're already too far behind them. It isn't even good enough to think outside of the box anymore, because that's what everyone else is trying to do. We need to disregard the box altogether. Apple co-founder Steve Jobs had a motto for his company that they used in advertising campaigns: think different. We need to think differently if we're going to broaden our county's economic base and generate the type of revenue required if people want local government to be able to expand beyond fully funding its necessary functions and either fund the things that are nice to have but not required, or provide additional tax relief to attract more businesses and ease the burden on homeowners. For example, I don't mean simply attracting an Apple retail store to the county, although we should given our current economic ranking. I'm talking about attracting Apple to our county to build one of their massive iCloud server farms that they are instead locating in North Carolina. We've done things backward in the county. Had we focused on bringing high-end industry here, the residential construction boom, restaurants and shops would have naturally followed. Want evidence? Just look at Loudoun. That's precisely what happened there. We may be ranked number 7 nationally in terms of wealth, but Loudoun is number 1. Their median household income is $25,000 more than ours, and even $15,000 more than number 2 Fairfax's. That's because they've cultivated a business sector that isn't almost entirely reliant upon government. The waves are just beginning to surge for biotech, clean tech, 3D printing, additive manufacturing, and advanced manufacturing. We need to be courting these industries right now. To that end, I do see great promise now emerging from our new Economic Development Executive Director, Jeffrey Kaczmarek, and his team. Kaczmarek has shown in less than a year that he knows how to market the county properly, something that was previously sorely lacking. The wet lab space at the Prince William Science Accelerator located at Innovation has the potential to bring in top-notch biotech companies in the field of life sciences. Even in this field, however, we are still in direct competition with a wet lab space in Fairfax and Montgomery County, Maryland. All the marketing in the world will not help if the underlying structure is not sound. We must make certain that our tax and regulatory policies do not scare businesses off to another nearby locality. In April of 2011, I was attending a county board meeting when commercial developer Mike Garcia spoke during Citizens Time about the challenges companies face in doing business in the county. According to Mr. Garcia, the county charges $500 just to obtain a permit in order to move a fire sprinkler head in an office building. That's per sprinkler head, and that does not cover the cost of actually moving it. Moving sprinkler heads is done in order to accommodate the build-out requirements that companies have for office spaces. If If another jurisdiction just a few miles down the road doesn't present such obstacles, where do you think businesses are more likely to locate? What else can we do? We can institute accountability budgeting, setting clear, measurable goals, verifying progress, and making adjustments as necessary. This is a new twist on zero-based budgeting. Not only would agencies and departments have to justify every dollar they request each year rather than start from the previous year's baseline and grow from there, but requests for funds must be accompanied by specific measurable goals against which progress can be ascertained. This will allow for future budgets to make adjustments based upon what works and what doesn't work. We need fundamental reform of our tax structure in Prince William County in order to protect taxpayers, as well as to ensure the county's continued economic development and prosperity. We should be upfront about what taxes the county collects. County taxes on electricity, telephone service, both landline and cell, and cable, as well as the personal property tax decal fee, should be abolished and made transparent by utilizing real estate taxes to raise the same revenue instead. Likewise, special assessments for fire and other services should be included in the real estate tax, not separated out. By doing these two things, taxpayers would know precisely how much they are paying in taxes and would also be able to deduct the full amount from their federal taxes, something which they cannot do now. If we act on these items, we can become the economic powerhouse that I know we are capable of being. This is how we not only grow the pie, but bake new ones. That is how we can afford to fully fund local government's core functions, provide desperately needed tax relief to homeowners, and still expand the services that the county can offer. It's time that we begin to think different.
Our next speaker is Dr. Babar Latif. He's been a practicing ophthalmologist in Woodbridge for 11 years. He serves on the staff of Centara Potomac Hospital and Prince William Hospital. He's an assistant clinical professor at the George Washington University School of Medicine. Dr. Latif is active in a number of county organizations, including the Greater Prince William Community Health Center, the Prince William Area Free Clinic, and the Prince William Chamber of Commerce. He and his wife have 4 children and are active in the PTO at Marshall Elementary School, the Coles District Cub Scouts, and Coles Little League Baseball. In 2001, he was also a candidate for the chairman of the Prince William Board of County Supervisors.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel, and thank you to the distinguished panelists and the distinguished guests that have arrived tonight. As you heard, my name is Babar Latif, and I am a physician. I previously ran for chair in 2011 against Corey Stewart. Most of you know that I lost that race fairly spectacularly. It is easy to, after an election like that, find a rock in the woods and hide very deep and down and get into the dark and just stay there and not worry about anything else. But, what I did learn from the campaign was that it is extremely important to stay engaged, to be active civically, and I decided, rather than running and hiding, I would stand up and still speak my mind out on issues that I thought were important. And so I really thank you guys for asking me to come out and speak tonight. There were very few points that I ever agreed with Corey Stewart on. And one of them, he said, we were chatting one time, he said, I think everybody ought to run for an office once in their life. It is a life-changing experience. You will learn a lot about yourself. You'll learn a lot about the community. You'll learn a lot about the people and the neighbors you have around you. And I did do that. And that is the only thing I agreed 100% with Corey Stewart. So I'd like to begin with my discussion with some of the short notes about what I thought I learned as I traveled around the county and met residents. And these notes, I believe, are pertinent to tonight's discussion. Number one, I never met a county resident or taxpayer who did not have a problem paying for taxes if they felt the services they received were valuable. They never felt that there was something wrong with paying their taxes as long as the services they got they deemed valuable. Never met one, not a single one, Republican, Democrat, or Independent. Number two, most voters agreed that we need to, and I'll go over this, continue to improve our schools. Transportation, infrastructure was absolutely critical on the minds of voters and on the minds of most of the county residents. They also felt that it was absolutely critical, as Mr. Riley pointed out, to bring jobs to our county. And that was something that was very high on the voters' minds. Now realize this is their thoughts during the Great Recession. They wanted to see an investment in education, and an investment in infrastructure for transportation, and an investment in bringing jobs to our county. The third thing I learned was that the average taxpayer, citizen, believes we should have services equal to or better than our surrounding counties. There is no reason why we ought to have services that are less than our surrounding counties. Examples I can give you all night long, but I'll give you one because my wife is a pediatric neurologist, and and I spend a lot of time taking care of kids also in my 4 kids in the school system. But our services for children with autism, Asperger's syndrome, which by the way is an epidemic, it's about 1% of the kids being born today will be diagnosed with some level of that. In our school system, we don't provide the needs for those kids like they do in Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax. So, the pediatric neurology service, a children's hospital, many of them who deal with these kids, when they get a new kid or a new family in, the family will say, that they're counseling the child with, the family with autism. The first question they ask, where do you live? And they advise the families to really move into those counties where the services are better for them. Okay, and that's based on they're paying taxes and they're getting services that are valuable to them. And so our county doesn't provide some of the services that our surrounding counties need. And so when you met voters, you felt their frustrations with many of these different things. Number 4, much of what I just stated, some can say is from anecdotal evidence, which it was. I met voters, I talked to them, direct contact, but we spent a lot of money during our campaign on polling. Polling is very expensive. Polling that we spent money on wasn't like, did you like me better than John Gray, or did you like Corey Stewart better than me? It was about issues. In local elections, when you formulate your campaign, one of the things I learned is that you really need to know what the voters are thinking about and what the issues are. And because that's going to help you formulate your plan, your strategy for moving with the future. So we spent a lot of money on this. And it was fascinating to look at some of this data. And Corey has the same data as I did because he spent money on polling too. And the polling firms poll the same people, likely voters in 2011. The number one issue on their mind was education. Across the board, way above every other issue, it was, they wanted to talk to you about education. Number 2 was transportation. 3, way down was 3 was jobs, and then everything else fell below 10% is something that anybody wanted to talk about. So, some of the things they talked about in education, why do we have the lowest teachers' salaries in the region? Why do we have some of the highest class sizes? We're the 7th wealthiest or whatever wealthiest county in the country. We ought to be doing better. We should be doing better. And I want to be doing better. And so, those were, so we got this evidence based on my polling, based on, going around and talking to people. They also, when you polled them, overwhelmingly did not like to hear about cuts to services. And obviously, this is an obvious thing, right? Nobody wants to hear you're going to cut fire, police, schools, social service. But they were more interested, they didn't want to see services cut, legal services to the poor. They didn't want to see services cut for homeless. All of these things, they looked at it very negatively. And so those are our neighbors. Those are the people that voted in this election. And it's funny, and I say Corey had the same data as I did because he spent the same kind of money on polling. It was funny, right after the election, he came out and said, we're gonna invest in infrastructure, we're gonna invest in schools, he had this great speech, and it sounded like Elizabeth Warren. He sounded like a real good liberal, and I was like, man, fantastic. I may have lost the election, but maybe I got through a little bit. And then he got blasted by his friends on the right, and so then he backed off of that. But the reason he said a lot of that is because of what we both learned across, and what John learned in the campaign. People want to see services here. They want to. And they do not feel that it's a problem paying for their taxes if they get the services they deem valuable. And Jim very nicely, Mr. Riley, very nicely outlined some of the things that folks in the county feel are very valuable, some of the real important services. During the campaign, I also learned, I became familiar with the budget. And one of the things Mr. Riley also points out is that, and I'll take it a step further, most counties, when you run a budget, about the ideal way to run a budget is 65 to 70% of the revenue for the county operating budget ought to come from property taxes. The rest of it ought to come from different sources. So the problem, and so Fairfax is like that, Loudoun's like that, Alexandria, Arlington, they're like that. Our problem is that number has gone from the 60s, 70s, and each year has continued. We're almost up to 80% of the county operating budget is funded by the property tax alone. the property tax alone. The burden of running the county government is on you, on the homeowner, on the property tax owner, not anywhere else. When it comes time when we need more money, we can only come back to this one source. And that's a problem. And it's a problem, our friends on the right say, yeah, we can't raise property taxes, it's terrible, but that's our only source of revenues. They tie our hands by not allowing the state to allow us to do income taxes here, to have gas taxes here, to have local control, which is what, most of my Republican friends want. So what is local control? Local control is being able to do and tax and levy taxes on anything as you wish, or that meet the needs of your county. But we're constantly relying on the property tax. And so that is a major problem and continues to be a problem. And we need to look for new revenue sources. Stafford County has a meals tax. City of Occoquan has a meals tax. There are different sources of revenue that we can take that no longer or lessen the burden on our property tax owner. So that summarizes a little bit about what I learned, as I ran. I know tonight's talk is about a flat tax sort of proposal, revenue neutral versus incremental increases. I fully support the plan laid out by Supervisor Jenkins. It addresses unmet needs, be critical or non-critical. We have major growth. Jim Riley put a nice paper together talking about our growth here in the county. We have massive growth ahead of us. We've increased our population 200,000 people in the last 25 years. There's no sign that it's slowing down, folks. It's not slowing down. We either have to stand up and say we're going to get ready for it and prepare our county for it, and that means investing in schools, investing in infrastructure for transportation. Loudoun County has done well because they have the Dulles Greenway. It's easy to get out there. It's not just that they have a different tax base. They have transportation options that we don't have. There are really tremendous differences in our regional, and we're sort of an island that's bound by the lack of transportation. Supervisor Jenkins has been working on transportation for a long time. He understands what we're talking about. The voters in this county all want Metro here. I know that's unpopular, I know that's expensive, but we either beef up VRE, we bring Metro down here. These are the kinds of things we have to do, and these cost money. I am obviously, supporting a continued increase in the tax rate, and we need to really, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but we have this 5-year plan, which I would call a 5-year myth, because we never really stick to it. Okay, so a flat tax neutral proposal I see as sort of a political gimmick that will become part of the myth and legend of our 5-year plan.
And our final panelist tonight is Supervisor Wally Covington. He's represented the Brentsville Magisterial District on the Board of County Supervisors since January of 2004, and he practices law in the city of Manassas. In 2012, Supervisor Covington was elected chairman of the VRE Operations Board. From 2004 to 2011, he represented the county on the Metropolitan Council of Governments, and he's in his 3rd term on the PRTC. Since January of 2010, he served on the advisory board for George Mason at the Prince William campus, and he's a member of the board of directors of the Hilton Performing Arts Center. Supervisor Covington also serves the county on the board of directors of the Association of Owners at Innovation. He and his wife Connie have 3 children, and they live in Knoxville.
Thank you all. It's good to be here. I think it's been probably 5 or 6 years since I've been down to Westminster, and all looks good here. Thank you for letting me participate. First off, this is my 10th year on the Board of Supervisors and my 10th budget as we come along. I have voted against one budget on the board previously, and that was the first budget that was out. I felt like the rate of increase exceeded inflation that year, and cast a vote against it. I was not successful in convincing my colleagues to bring the rate down, but in future years, I think it did have an effect, and I think we've been a consistent steward over the years, especially under Supervisor Stewart's leadership, in keeping the rate under the inflationary rate, being at a flat level. I will say that last year I voted against the 5-year plan. It was the first time I had voted against that, seeing that the 4% rate that was offered through that 5-year plan was in excess of what I believed inflation would be, and was frustrated that we were not sticking to that portion of our plan. And it had been the board's policy in the past to use inflation as a guide. And I think we slipped away from that last year in the process. I think it's important to remember that this year we're looking at a lot of moving parts. I don't think I've ever seen the level of increases coming about from the federal and state levels. The healthcare reform and the first federal tax increase that we saw at the end of the year, I've seen those levels back in the 70s, and they were devastating on the country and the community. What I think we're looking at this time is further federal increases, but as of today, it looks like we're looking at state increases, which are usually very rare in Virginia. It set us apart in Virginia in terms of keeping our taxes low and being able to attract business because of those low taxes. And I think we've been extremely effective in that in terms of our competition with Maryland over the years. And so I'm a little bit concerned about, we haven't seen the final version yet. I know they're going to vote tomorrow. But those tax increases will be on some of, they're not progressive taxes. They're very regressive taxes. And they will hurt some of our poorest members of the community. And so, the taxes that are being raised at the federal and state level are cutting across the board. They're coming at a time where the federal government is cutting jobs. I do believe that Mr. Riley is right, that sequestration is going to happen. And the effects of sequestration are going to be devastating on Northern Virginia, and they're going to have an effect on Prince William County. And we need to be prepared for those effects and be as flexible as we can. One of the pieces in there is the HUD housing element, cutting those vouchers. While I've never been a big proponent of the voucher system, people rely incredibly on those vouchers. And having those vouchers pulled is going to put a lot of people on the street. And the effect of that across the community on public safety, on housing, that's going to be something that eventually falls to local government. It's a mandate, in my opinion, from the federal level. We often talk about the state mandates, but we're going to see more and more federal mandates too. And we need to be flexible as a community to be able to address those needs. The 4% rate, to me, has been too high. The 3% rate was also too high. I've advocated for the flat rate this year. I just think that with all of these moving parts, we need to be much more conservative than we've been in the past. And I think that we have to stick to our core beliefs, and our core priorities in this government have been education, public safety, and transportation. We may not be able to do all of the park things that we'd like to do. I think we've been very aggressive on some of them. We've got to look more at the partnership elements that I think we've been effective with. We've got to hone those numbers down, and we've got to take advantage of the changes that are there. We can make, with the healthcare reforms that are coming in, the chairman put forth, and really the county executive put forth options on reducing the health department. There's no reason to duplicate some of those services. Eventually, the state will come around and trim those services in the next year or two when they realize the duplications are there. But we can be proactive ahead of time and cut some of those duplications. I've also advocated removing some of the unfilled FTEs that are in the county. Been astounded at the large number of unfilled FTEs. I don't know that we can reduce all of them in that sense. Some of them have critical value, but we can look at saving and tightening that FTE element. The other thing that, while I support adding the public safety officials that we add, where all three budgets at the state level are adding 3 years worth of cuts back in. So those have been 599 cuts. They've been law enforcement cuts. We're going to be able to rehire police officers from those cuts. They all go through our same training center, coupled with the ones that we are adding at the local, I'll call it at the local level, at the real estate tax. Those things will mean that we have more police officers coming online that we can probably take through our academy, coupled with the retirements that come through. There's no reason to budget for all of those and then just have carryover funds. We can tighten the budget in those areas. It's a little bit early in that process. We don't know the final numbers from the state. We hope to get those. And we hope that they do approve a budget and we have something that we can work off of rather than projecting at this point. I think it's important to look at a couple of other things. Mr. Jenkins mentioned the voting machines. There's nothing wrong with our voting machines, a little bit more training, but the state has told us we can no longer use those machines. So we have another state mandate coming along saying there needs to be a paper trail. And, that's a difficult thing because they don't provide any money with it. That means the real estate tax picks up the idea of the General Assembly that there's something wrong with the machines. At the same time, I will mention that many of our machine issues that came through this last election dealt with split precincts. And when I was on the electoral board, we didn't have split precincts. The General Assembly worked through those issues, and largely you looked at one ballot when you went into the polling place. Now we look at, 3, 4, 5. I think Mr. Dougherty's has 3 Senate districts, but then 1 or 2 House districts, and once you put those various permutations in, you're going to create problems. And so those types of issues can be solved without replacing voting machines. Voting machines aren't going to change that. I think at this point in time, we need to be very flexible, and we need to really look hard at education. I've advocated over the years that the percentage that we spend on education is not as high as it should be. We should be trimming and tightening up the county government side, but we should be working with the school division. And I agree with Mr. Jenkins. We need to make sure that they're spending the money properly, and we need to look at those priorities. But we need to put more money into education at this point. We're seeing that in Loudoun, and I believe Stafford both have higher percentages going into their educational system. And we need to be more committed in that area. I believe we attract better businesses, a stronger business climate here when our school system ranks as high as it possibly can rank. And we rank very well in the nation, but we are behind in Northern Virginia in some of those test scores. But I think we can do better. And so I stand ready to answer questions. We could probably ramble on a little longer, but being a conservative, I like to leave a little time on the table.
All right, we're going to take some questions from the audience. As always, committee members go first. Martha, you need a mic?
I need a microphone. Okay. Take yours here, or do you want to ask a question? Okay, who had their hand up?
I'm watching. We've got a few
Now,
minutes.
Kim?
We've got a few minutes.
No, we got, I think about 15 minutes. Who was first? Here you go.
Hi, I'm John Graham from the Occoquan District. The whole purpose of the flat tax proposal, is this on?
Can we hear you?
No, it was on before.
Now it's on. Okay. The whole purpose of the flat tax proposal from Supervisor Canlon, full disclosure, I'm on that committee. This is
They're making adjustments back there.
Okay. The whole purpose of the, is this still on? Yes. Okay, thank you. Sorry. Full disclosure, I'm on Supervisor Canlon's Budget Committee. The purpose of the flat tax proposal that's being debated, or was debated, wasn't approved, is to take the carryover funds, and I believe, Mr. Riley, you mentioned those, and obviously, Wally, you mentioned those, that it averages, depending on which viewpoint you look, but there's about 16 million of disposable funds available. There's 32 million, as you said, but a lot of those are used to support the current budget. But the real amount that could be used to support services that are not being provided to the county is $16 million. And the whole purpose of that, of the flat tax proposal here, is not to cut social services, but to use those funds that the county is collecting today. They've already projected that their budget's surplus the end of this year, next June, will be another $16 million. So it's safe to say, if we've consistently had a $16 million surplus, why don't we budget the use of that money now and fill those services, the police, the fire, the schools especially, okay, the schools, things like that. So I guess, Wally, the question is to you, why isn't that proposal being looked at to use the funds that are available?
You know, I think we've debated that a little bit. I don't know that we've gotten the full run of it. Where I've agreed with, is this on? Yeah. It's hard to tell. Where I've agreed with some of that concept is that I think OIT, because the carryover funds are used to fund OIT and the reserves, I'd like to see OIT come in and be an actual budget item. I mean, we've had obvious problems with OIT in the past. I'm not sure I agree with the way the budgeting is done on OIT and the way the accounting methods have done. I've had several meetings with staff on that. I'm more concerned about making sure that we keep that culture of saving in categories and using funds for reserve. I like that concept, but I could listen to more debate on that and see where it ultimately ends up. And I know you don't necessarily agree on cutting the health department and some of those issues, but the duplication of services that I think that are going to come out of some of those things, I mean, you can only hand out so many contraceptives, and there just doesn't need to be different groups doing that. You know, if the federal government's going to do it, then let them do it, and that we don't need to be paying for it twice. And so cutting some of those areas, it's a state function, and we're picking up like 2/3 of that function. So I think there's some room to change things because the federal government's changing them, and we need to be regressive in that area. I think I got all of it, and probably a little more than you wanted.
Okay, Harry, and back here. My instructions are hold it close and speak loudly.
Close enough? Okay. All right. My question is really a statement and a question, and it has to do with the schools. As I understand it, there's 2 counties in the Commonwealth, and probably 2 in the United States, that use a percentage of revenue split to fund the schools. Henrico County down by Richmond, that wraps around northern Richmond, and Prince William County. We have the largest class size in the Commonwealth right now. We have the fifth highest teacher turnover rate of 135 jurisdictions in the Commonwealth. So we have a high teacher turnover, with teachers going to Fairfax to make $7,000 more on average, down to Stafford to make $50 more without the aggravation. We allegedly, Supervisor Stewart, every time I hear him, says we're the 7th wealthiest county in the United States. Our teachers don't make the top 1,000 in teacher compensation in the United States. We have the lowest test scores in Northern Virginia, of any county in Northern Virginia. And yet we say that education is a priority. And it clearly isn't. Every politician says the same thing: education, transportation, public safety. In Prince William County, education is clearly not a priority. This archaic split of revenue has nothing to do with the needs of the Prince William County schools. And until that changes, the schools get the short shrift. We got the kids in trailers without bathrooms. And the Board of Supervisors sits up there and points to the school board, and of course the school board sits there and points to the Board of Supervisors because there isn't enough money. That archaic system of split has to end if we're going to have a decent school system, which we don't have. The school system touts world-class education. They should be touting third world-class education.
Is there a
And,
question?
yeah, there is a question. Supervisor Covington mentioned that education is a priority. Tell me why you think it is a priority on a flat tax.
I think it's, we put it in, we show it as a priority in our strategic plan and in our comp plan issues, and at a flat tax level, what I believe we need to do, and I've advocated for it before, is that we need to give a higher percentage. We need to make it a higher priority. I don't believe the school system is as bad as you say, but I do believe that we can make improvements to it. I think there are other things that we can do. We've been instrumental in working with we're blessed in this county to have one community college with two centers, Woodbridge and Manassas. And the school system and in the county to some extent have worked hard on improving that college system. We put $1 million, I believe, in leveraged state funds into a vocational program. Last year, the school system has been working on taking dual enrollments. I think we can do more in that area. I mean, we have unutilized classroom space at both of those during the daytime. They're primarily for students that are, 2.5-year college and vocational programs. They're going to night school while they work. Well, during the day, there's space open. And so we could do more there. We could fund more directly into that program and pick up some kids that would go both ways, both vocationally and college bound. And I think it's an underutilized program, and it's one of those few areas that I think the state has funded fairly well in recent years. I'm sure Dr. Hill would tell us they need more, but be that as it may, it's a gem here in Prince William County, and it can be a greater asset than we've utilized it before. So that would be a priority, and raising that percentage is something I've advocated before. I know other supervisors are starting to talk more about it too at this point.
I'm going to answer that a little bit. There is, by the way, and the supervisors can correct me on this, there is no law that says they can spend more on the school system. The revenue sharing agreement's an agreement as a minimum sort of number, 57, 56.9%, whatever it is for the schools, the rest for the county operating budget. There is no law that restricts the county board of supervisors from standing up and saying, we're going to pay more to get rid of those trailers this year. We're going to pay more to pay teachers more money. We're going to get our class sizes down. There's no law that says they can't spend more than 57%. I have one concern that I disagree with you on, Harry, that I think if we get rid of the revenue sharing agreement, I'm afraid some of the supervisors will drop what we spend on education. And I think that's something that we really ought to look at and say, are they really going to raise it? I mean, that's where I'm afraid, okay? As a citizen, father of 4 kids in the school system, I'm not that confident when our current Board of Supervisors refuse to accept federal funding from the Obama administration in light of ideological bombing and saying, hey, look, we're not going to take the $10 million to hire the 130 teachers because, we're going to be on the hook for that money. That was nonsense. That was found to be nonsense. They accepted the money quietly the next year. But I'm not confident that they're going to be able to do that. So if you get rid of this revenue sharing agreement, it could go down to 50%. It could go down to 49%. Who's to say it won't? Let's have the agreement, but let's say if there's watershed money that comes in because assessments are up this year, let's put more towards the schools. It doesn't have to be 57, we can put 60%. We can meet some of our unmet needs in the school system. But that's the way I look at it as a citizen and as a guy who tries to look at these things.
I was talking about how we need to think different. This is one of the areas where I don't think we should be different. As you pointed out, us and Henrico County are the only two in the state and possibly the country that have such an agreement. I agree with you. We need to get rid of it. My wife's a kindergarten teacher in the county school systems. I see it from all different aspects. I see the overcrowded classrooms. I see the money that my wife puts in. I see the extra hours that she puts in. And I firmly believe that if we were to get rid of this agreement, that schools would be funded at the level that they should be funded at, because that's what people want. And that kind of public pressure is what can be brought to bear in order to get our schools funded at the levels that they need to be funded. Priorities can be made in other areas of the budget, but we do need to make sure that the schools are a good, functioning system, and I agree with you that there's a lot of dysfunction there right now.
Ready to change the tape?
Are we done with that question? Take another question.
Martha? Can I
Yes.
ask a question?
Yes, you may.
Okay, I got one. As we're addressing the next round of tax questions, I've been scratching out on paper, and yesterday the Board of Supervisors discussed a $1.21 tax rate, which is basically our current tax rate, give or take, and a $1.15 tax rate. And as far as I can tell, the difference in my taxes is $11 a month. So we're talking about taxes in terms of broad millions of dollars and giant programs. Can you guys address at some point the actual cost of tax increases to homeowners? Because to some people that $11 a month is a lot, and to some people it's not very much. But it's more of a personal issue than millions of dollars for giant programs. It's small amounts of money here and there for individuals. Questions from the audience? Right here. Your name.
My name is Tom Fitzpatrick. I'm from the Occoquan District. I appreciate everybody being here. It was one of the better discussions I've heard. If I were to use a single word to describe it, and I never do, it would be specificity. And in that regard, just this evening I met Mr. Riley, and I really appreciated his comments from a citizen's perspective. That's the way I look at it, concerned citizen, offering specificity as opposed to, with no disrespect, the emotional appeals of others, which lack that specificity about critical levels, must-haves, world-class, all these words we've heard time and time again used to support yet another increase in taxes, which may or may not be incrementally small, but they build upon each other and build upon each other and build upon each other to become very large. And that's really not the question. The question is, and this is my question, is I've been frustrated by the lack of specificity provided by our elected candidates and representatives, as well, and in particular by our staff. I think this is done deliberately, because if we looked at the costs in the shopping cart like we do in the supermarket, we put some things back on the shelves. So my question is, when will we be getting the price tag at a minute level of detail so the educated shopper, as Cy Sims used to say, can make the decision for him or herself? And they can decide what's critical and what's important and what's valuable. Who's going to support that specificity?
Thank you. Tara, do you have a volunteer up there?
Anyone want to volunteer for that?
I would, but I have no say in the matter.
Sure, it's my
Oh, it's a microphone. Sorry about that.
I don't know whether that's working or not, but thanks, it's a good question. I think county government could be better at that. I do think that they follow the state guidelines, remembering that we're a Dillon rule state, and we're, in terms of dollar amounts, tend to be dominated by CPAs and accountants and following rules that I sit through audit meetings, and you really have to dig through those numbers to sort of figure out what you're spending on different things. Another thing that we deal with is, and this kills, you all know that I'm a big advocate of partnerships. And one of the biggest partnerships we have in the county is with the fire department. We have not been kind to the volunteer fire department in Prince William County in the last 10 years. And I think that's a shame. I think we could do much better with our volunteer fire department. And we, in urban areas, you're starting to see more and more of unionized fire departments. That being said, as I go through this process with the volunteers, they tell me that one of the most frustrating things is they could go and buy a computer at, or a board at Home Depot before, and now they have to go through a procurement process that, the county mandates, but the state mandates to the county. So as we become more bureaucratic, we lose that flexibility. Now, there's value in the bureaucracy, I guess, and that value is that you're keeping embezzlements down, and so I see why we do certain things the way we do, but we, largely follow rules, and, the more transparent we can be, I think the better, but I won't tell you that it's easy, just because we're following the accounting rules and the audit rules that are hard to follow.
Name and district, please.
Sure. Excuse me, I have a cold. My name's Ernie Porta, and I'm from Occoquan. My question is directed to Supervisor Jenkins and Supervisor Covington. Mr. Riley makes a pretty strong charge here that these regular annual surpluses are either intentional or the result of incompetence. And as a result, I'd like, and Wally, I think you addressed this in part by talking about FTEs. I'd like the two of you to perhaps explain to the audience what the source of these consistent surpluses are, and whether or not you believe there are other explanations besides that they're intentional or the result of incompetence. Thank you.
Can you hear me? There we go. Let me answer that two different ways. I have here a report that I brought with me tonight, and it was a report that was developed at the request of Supervisor Covington. And what this does is it lists every full-time equivalent authorization and whether or not that position is occupied or not occupied. And if it's not occupied, why is it not occupied, and how long has it been vacant? So I think one of the huge problems that we have with the so-called surplus is the fact that if you add up all the figures, contrary to what somebody said here tonight, I didn't want to get into a debate about it, but if you add up all the figures, the total value of these surpluses right now is $5,600,000. And that is at a point in time. So what I'm saying to you is that tomorrow, this is not going to be valid, because you can look in here at police officers, animal caretaker, days vacant, 201. Why has it been vacant? Well, we've advertised it twice. Applicants don't meet the standards. Sworn and civilian staff from other areas in the police department are being pulled in to complete the work to compensate for the vacant positions. Now, you can go through this report, and I'll be happy to leave it here if you want to take a look at it. But that's the kind of thing that causes an immediate surplus. We call it a lot of times hiring lag. You know, in other organizations I've been in, that's basically what they say. A lot of people use that as a management tool. They will keep a position vacant so that they have money coming up on year end, depending on the organization, and they'll take that money and do something else with it that benefits the organization. So that's answer number one. Now, going back a minute to the issue about schools and the percentage. I'm responsible for that number. I don't mind telling you that we had a board-appointed team, myself and Michelle McQuigg, and Lyle Biefeld and John David Allen were the two members from the school board. Remember I told you I'd done something like 32 budgets? Well, this particular one, we saw there was a problem with money getting to the schools. And one of the things that we decided as a team to do was to recommend to our respective boards that we adopt, and we had done quite a few calculations with the staff of the county and the staff of the school board, and it just worked out that year that the magic figure was 56.75%. And it worked so well to get the revenue back up in the schools that next year it was another 56.75, and everybody's happy. And I have not heard lots and lots of complaints about the 5675 until the last 3 or 4 years. And people begin to raise the issue again. You can make that number anything you want. It doesn't have to be 56.75, but let me tell you this. When school opens on, what is it, 1st of September or sometime in that? Day after Labor Day? The day we open the doors, there are going to be 2,200 new students in that school division. Now, what are you going to do with those 2,200 students? Are you going to educate them, or how are you going to handle it? If you try to bring them up to get the ideal, now I'm an educator of sorts, and Ernestine was a school teacher for 30 years too. But I can tell you that class size makes a difference. You can't just throw these 2,200 students into a class and watch a class size go up to 30 or something like that when it should be around 18 to 23. So these are the dilemmas that you catch yourself in when you start talking about flat tax rate. Because regardless of what you set that tax rate at, these events are going to occur. The vacancy, the time lag, the fact that you're going to have more students, and that would be my quick answer to you.
Thank you. We've got 4 more questions here, and then I think we'll have to wind it up. You're next.
I think the gentleman from Susan Moriarty, Occoquan, I believe the gentleman was asking how an individual can be involved and know the specifics of the county budget. Is that what you were saying?
What I was saying is that it's a hide and seek game for the county.
Well, here,
They'll answer a question, but you gotta have it. It's not presented in a way that specificity is obvious.
well, here's one of
I have
the
a question for the panel.
Does one of the
No.
rest of you want to take a swing at that?
experience has taught me, if you go to your supervisor's office, you can get involved with task teams, you can download the budget, and you can get very intimately involved. Plus, they have hearings, which the public is invited to listen to as they're building the budget, too. And that's one way to get in on the ground floor.
And I've done that. It's extremely time-consuming, not for the average voter.
Okay, let's go to a question here. State your name and district and
Bill Golden, Dale City. Okay, so let's say the tax rate doesn't go up either way. That doesn't really matter, though, if the assessment rate changes, because you could effectively raise the taxes almost any way you want it. How does the county and how does the Board of Supervisors control that tax assessment rate?
You want to do it?
Again, we follow the state's guidelines and rules, and they give us 2 sets of guidelines on tax assessments. In most of the Northern Virginia and urban counties, we assess every year. And that's a good thing, and it's a bad thing. Most of the counties in the rural area, Fauquier County, for example, they assess every 4 years. So they save money by not having as many assessors, but if they assess in a high year, then, and the markets go down, then they hide higher taxes for a longer period of time. So there's a downside to that element, too. We cannot, by state law, cannot change the assessments. We have to get them, they have to be done by a professional appraiser, and they have to fall into that guideline. That does not keep people from protesting. We have what's called a state guideline. We have a board of equalization that hears those cases. Most of them are, you don't hear of too many residential properties, but many of the commercial properties will come in and protest their tax as being, and mostly it's the assessment that they think is too high, and they'll bring in their professionals, and there's a fight back and forth. Sometimes it resolves itself at the Board of Equalization, sometimes it ends up in circuit court, and they can go all the way through the court system in that process. I think we do a pretty good job in the county, but there's always a venue for appeal.
Anyone else on the panel have a comment on that?
Yeah, let me have that mic a minute. I think it's now, okay. I think that it's very important that you understand that that equalization board he's talking about is made up of citizen landowners. I think that's a basic criteria for being on there, is you have to be a free holder of land. You have to be a citizen in here in the county. And then if the Board of Equalization doesn't agree with the taxpayer, and the taxpayer goes to court, he's going to go to court. He's not going to go to the Board of Supervisors. It's a judicial matter that has to be resolved by the court. And then the court makes the decision as to whether or not the assessment is fair or not fair. Is that about right, Wally?
I'm loath to pipe in here, but having been a real estate appraiser in a very, very long ago life, I will tell you the Board of Supervisors has nothing to do with the assessment, except that they hire an office of assessments. And doing mass assessments for the entire county is very different than doing house-by-house individual assessments. And the what you wind up paying in taxes is a product of the factor of the assessment, which is determined by the state code to have to be market value times whatever the board makes as their tax rate. And the important number is multiplied together, what do you get? Which is the amount you pay in taxes. So sometimes I can't help myself in commenting on things like that. There was another question right here.
My name's Willie Deutsch. I'm actually from the Absco District. My question was to Supervisor Jenkins and maybe to Supervisor Covington as well, but I was listening to Supervisor Jenkins, and what I heard was we shouldn't decrease funds to a whole bunch of programs. We need to raise salaries by 3%. I wish I got a 3% raise. And we need to raise other things. But at a time when we're getting our budgets cut, personally, both by increased taxes and by sequestration, where can we cut spending in the county?
Well, I think the answer to that is that we have managers in the county staff that are charged with running their organizations on a best practices, in a best practices mode. And it just takes leadership from the county executive and the department directors. We need to continue to make policies which are frugal in nature, and I think this board has been very, very frugal. The fact that we all agreed yesterday to the 1.196 assessment is an indication that you got the 8 people on that board that more or less agree with that tax rate. I will give you this, that 3 of them did not vote for the tax rate, but that's okay. We live in a majority rules society, and so the best we can do is to continue to do our measurements, set our objectives out there, and then measure against them. And we have some really good programs based on the strategic plan process that sets objectives for us to go out, and then we measure against those objectives. And I can't just give you any one particular place that we cut, but we try to do away with any waste that we come upon, and that's about as good an answer as I can give you.
Remember, all we did yesterday was advertise a rate.
Right.
So the debate will go on. This is This is not the end, so ideas that you have, the next few months are more critical. In my opinion, this year is more critical than in previous years, because the federal and state movements that are there, there's going to be new money coming into the county from some of those functions, and there's going to be some money coming out. And it's going to change, I don't know that it's going to change our three major priorities greatly, but it's going to change some of our smaller priorities. And some of those things we're going to be able to make some cuts in, and we're going to be able to make some changes in. I would also note that, people asked about parks. We did open a park last night, 200 and some acres in the Coles district. Used to be the Brentsville district. And so at a very low cost to the county, and at least in the short term. A long time ago when the county bought the land, it cost a lot. But
Okay, we have one question here, one in the back, and then we'll finish up with John Gray with a follow-up.
Thank you. I'm Diane Ralston. I'm out of NABSCO. I have two questions. They may all run together at some point. As a citizen, and a new citizen of 6-7 years, I find this not to be the argument over education. Should we fund health? Should we fund mental health? It seems to me to be kind of silly. I sat on with Al Albert the 5-year strategic plan, which was just adopted. We thought of everything that most people would want to see in a community, where the community and its officers respect one another. Nobody wants to come to Prince William County if you don't have good parks. Nobody wants to come to Prince William County if you have bad schools. Guess what? Nobody cares how much your taxes are, especially if they're leaving urban cities, where taxes are 10% and better. I come from one of those. So I think I'm living free in Prince William County. What makes this place, and maybe you've all lived here too long to have appreciation, because I'm still jumping up and down for joy. It is probably one of the prettiest places, well kept, I hate to say it, well managed, because I come from where, we pass stuff all the time, with no idea of how to pay for it. And truly, I may not always agree with you, Mr. Covington, but that's okay, because you can't kill me too badly. We've got to just stop and think and put some reality on this meat here, on this bone, because we are really talking about absolute small things in relationship to everything else. Yeah, but I had to make a statement. For Mr. Covington, let me ask you, do you not think that the voters of Prince William County deserve new machines? Thank you.
I have to ask a question, though. Where did you relocate from?
Oakland, California.
All right, thank you. Mr. Covington.
now, having worked on the electoral board for a number of years, I can tell you that the machines that we had when I came into that office in 1996 were larger than this table, higher than how I stood, and Mrs. Henley and I could barely read, and our eyes were younger back then, the sheets that came out of them. The improvement to the machines that we bought in 2001 or so were phenomenally better than what we had before. There's not a lot wrong with those machines now. It's just that they don't have a paper trail. And so we are meeting a political agenda on a national level that's trickled down. And you know, it's I guess nice to have new machines, but it's not to me, it's not the highest priority at this point, given that there's nothing wrong with the old machines, but we have no choice. It's a state mandate, so we will comply with the state mandates, and we will buy new machines. We're going to spread them over 3 years, as I understand it, so that the pain won't be as much. And I do agree with your statement that, you know, we argue about a lot of things, but we are very fortunate to be here. And there are a lot of people clamoring to get into this county and join our club, because we are a very successful club. And we could be in places like Detroit or even Madison County, Virginia. And I will tell you that their test scores and their jobs and their everything, they've got some beautiful country, but we are blessed with many things here. And no excuse that we can't make it better, and we should all work together to do that. And I thank you for this forum, that it's an opportunity. You all do good work, and you probably don't get as much publicity as you should. Anybody else?
Anybody else want to respond to that? Okay, here's the next question. Well, Harry, if you're going to point out about the election process task force.
Well, my question to Supervisor Covington, since he thinks the existing machines are okay, then that means he thinks that standing in line for 6 hours to vote is acceptable.
Wait a minute, we can't hear you, Harry.
Yeah, this is a statement and a question to Supervisor Covington. Since he thinks the existing machines are acceptable, that means he thinks that the 6-hour wait to vote is acceptable. Is that correct?
No, but I wouldn't blame the machine as the sole problem. No one's proved to me at this level that the machines were the problem.
Wally, it wasn't split. River Oaks did not have a split precinct. The last vote cast there was 10:46 p.m. And you think that that's acceptable?
Absolutely do not. But I don't know that you can prove to me that the machines were the cause of the problem.
Harry, you've double-dipped, triple-dipped here, and I will point out that both Harry and I are on the election process task force, and this is being thoroughly reviewed by 16 citizens, and we're getting an awful lot of data about this. Our next meeting, if anybody is interested, will be the 4th Wednesday in February. We're meeting the 2nd and the 4th Wednesdays. We do plan a couple of public meetings where we will hear from citizens and hope to hear a lot from a lot of people. So, thank you, Harry.
Senator Cummings and Senator Gerald Conway had a fantastic gala. I wish you had been there to hear.
We have another question back here.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Mo Johnson. I live in the Potomac District. And I just have a quick question. I've been to 2 of these meetings, and I'm still confused whether the budget and the 5-year plan takes into account growth, or is it only inflation? I heard talk about 5-year plan, we need to have it tied to inflation. But I haven't heard about growth. Obviously, we've got inflation going on. Obviously, it's got to be tied to inflation. But what about growth? How does that play a role in the 5-year plan and in the budget, for that matter?
Obviously, are you aware of the fact that we have a comprehensive plan, comprehensive land use plan?
I've heard of that.
Okay. The comprehensive land use plan lays out the county in terms of the types of development which can occur. And so we are aware of that development that's in what we call a pipeline, so to speak, and we know what's going to be built and what is being built and what the market is. And when we start to do the budget, remember I mentioned earlier that there are 2,200 new students countywide in the school. We take that into consideration. We take the fact that we have growth occurring in the corridors that are being developed. And it's not a complete 100% scientific process, but we do try to estimate what the growth is going to be. We know, for example, from experience, it's 417,000 people today, and by the end of next year, it's projected, I believe, to be up to 425,000. So we watch the population, we watch the building that's going on, we watch the economy, we watch everything that we possibly can, and we do talk on a regular basis to each other about the conditions that we are governing in.
So it would be wrong for someone to say, we need to make sure the budget's just tied to inflation. That would be wrong. I mean,
No,
if you tied to inflation, you can grow.
It's not just tied to inflation alone. No, that answer is no. Wally,
Yeah, and this was one of the better years. In one of the presentations we got, they showed growth at about 4 or 5%. So if you were to add the 3.59% to the 4%, we're looking at about a 7.9 to, making the assumption that we didn't make other changes, you do have a growth factor in there. How that's measured is probably something we could debate, and get into, or is some of it falling into inflation, is some of it falling into growth? It's debatable, but staff put it at somewhere between 4 and 5%.
Actually, let me chime in here a little bit on this. The 5-year plan is interesting. They have a 5-year plan, and each year, so they plan to have the 5-year plan, and each year they reassess the 5-year plan. And so that's always been something I found, quirky about it, but it is a path and a guidance for them. A couple things I wanted to mention. What the gentleman over here asked a question about. Why should we should be looking for cutting when the economy's so bad? We should be cutting, the county budgets. I ideologically have a disagreement in the sense that I agree. I think that, as a county, we have a responsibility to stimulate the economy. We have a responsibility to help the folks living here. I think the tax money you pay, whether it be $11 extra per month or $30 extra per month for the year if the rate goes up, I think you get a payoff for it, because I do believe the county is, and it's painful for me to say it, pretty well run sometimes, okay? I think in some agencies it's well run, but it can be run a whole lot better. And I think there's a lot more things we can do, especially in the school system. And so I think the county is run very tight for a long time, and I think it can be expanded. The gentleman who ran economic development, Martin Briley, when I was running for the campaign, that year, Ann Wheeler, who was running out west, asked him this question. He was giving a briefing to all the candidates who were running in the county. And his job is to bring business to the county. His job is to attract, the kinds of business, not retail, not sales. He doesn't count that as part of his job. That's not considered economic development. Jim Riley, pointed that out really nicely. The residential and, shopping plazas do not count when you're talking about economic development. She asked Martin Briley, she said, if you had just one thing you could have on your wish list that would make it easier for you to do your job and attract everything you wanted here, what would it be? Without batting an eyelash, he said, a medical school. And, Supervisor Covington reminded me of this because he said, in Maryland, they were competing with the FDA, the NIH, to try to bring those kinds of jobs in biotech here. Martin Briley said, if we had a medical school in Northern Virginia, and if it was here at Prince William, George Mason campus, for example, we would be able to attract a lot of that biotech stuff. Because wherever there are medical schools, you get a lot of, biotech investment follows. PhD programs, wherever you have PhD programs, for example, Ohio State, where I come from, wherever there's a high number of PhDs being produced, you also have a high number of entrepreneurial organizations starting and companies starting. So these are the kinds of long-term investments sometimes the county can't do, but we can convince our state reps to say, bring them here. These are investments. They're investments the voters wanted you to make, wanted us to make, wanted the county to make in our county. I believe the tax revenue you spend, the money you give to the county, I believe can be used to further their goals and help those who are struggling, some of our friends who don't have the needs. For example, the medical clinics we were talking about, if you cut stuff to our medical clinics, and let's say our state legislature decides not to expand Medicaid and the governor decides not to fall in line with the Affordable Care Act, you're going to cut the health clinics and we're going to have Medicaid cut? That's not going to work, my friend. It doesn't work that way. So we have responsibilities to our community. So I will argue in a very strong fashion that our investment in our community matters and it makes a difference. Thank you, guys.
One last question then. We have a follow-up from John Gray, and this will be our last question.
Okay. Barbara, if you lost the election spectacularly, I lost it in epic proportions. And thank you for that lead. All right, Mr. Mayor, to answer your question, I believe the surplus that we have is intentional, and I think it's a structurally intentional in the budget for the sole reason that it was disclosed in August that when the Board of Supervisors proposes to spend $4 on a project, $5 is budgeted. That's a 25% over budget, not 20%, it's 25%. So I believe it's built inside there, and I think that's supported by the fact that we consistently have at least $16 million in the surplus. So my question, all right, Mr. Jenkins and Wally and Barbara, to you, I mean it respectfully. Mr. Jenkins, you know I have experiences, so I mean it respectfully. Why are you opposed to using the surplus, which is nothing but excess taxation, over-taxation, now to use to pay for the services that you want today, now, instead of waiting in August and using it for other things? If we know that the county is going to spend $55.5 million every year, as it has done for the last 5 years, I believe, 4 or 5 years in the OIC, all right, why don't we budget for that now and put it inside there instead of using it in August when frankly nobody's looking? That's my question.
I have a couple of answers for you. First of all, I told you earlier that one-time 5-year savings, one-time 5-year plan savings was $6,265,058. And that included some revenue from E911 of about $5 million. It included some additional development services from the general fund for support in fiscal year 14 in the amount of $550,000. And the ongoing savings is broken out with salary attrition. We talked about that. But what we didn't talk about is the recordation fees offset. There's so many sources of revenue out there. You hear me okay? Yes. All right, there's so many sources of revenue out there that you had to take each and every one of them into consideration. And I don't know how you would get out there and put a harness on recordation fees, for example, because you have recordation fees that are being paid when the sale of real estate is good. When the sale of real estate is bad, there's none coming. And so the only thing I can tell you is that you have a lot of different sources of revenue, and I think Mr. Covington mentioned this before, that feed that process. And to just pull it out, pull one part of it out is just not possible, I don't think.
Mr. Jenkins, you were in the government. What if you called it year-end fund?
I'm sorry, we're done with questions at this point.
I just want to pick up on something that Supervisor Jenkins said earlier about the vacant FTEs and how sometimes agencies will intentionally leave positions vacant so that way the money can then be spent on something else at the end there. It's a slush fund.
I'm the guy that went after the FTE, so I don't think you can say I haven't gone after that element of it. As far as carryover elements go, you've got to pull the OIT and the reserves into something else, and they've got to be their own budgeted items. If you don't have the reserves, then you can't maintain the AAA bond ratings, and I think those are important. But I do agree with you in terms of moving the OIT out of that, but you're still going to have to fund it. And I don't believe you're talking about the surplus or carryover elements that would be on a specific project. So if we were building Route 1 and we carried $5 million into the next year, and there's a lot of that goes on in a lot of the departments. And so once you separate that out, you've got some specific things, and the FTEs are the ones that are the most, that work on me the most. And so I'm sure we're going to talk about it more as the process goes on, we've got a couple of months of exciting times ahead. So, write your supervisors.
Okay, Ms. Donaldson,
I don't have anything else.
do you want to sum up, or do you want to say anything? Is the panel done with that question?
I'm just going to remind everyone that we'll be continuing to debate this with the Board of Supervisors for the next few weeks, so stay tuned on Tuesdays at 2 o'clock. They are broadcast over the internet on cable, and you can always show up in person. And if you show up at 2 o'clock, you can speak your mind at citizens' time, and they'd really love it when you do that, so you should definitely show up and give them an earful. Thank you.
Let's thank Ms. Donaldson for coming tonight and being our moderator. As you may remember, last May, she was sitting in one of those hot seats out there as we were talking about the future of print journalism in Prince William County, and that sure has changed just since May. It's not even a year from then. Supervisor Jenkins, Supervisor Covington, Mr. Riley, and Dr. Lateef, we sure thank you for being here tonight. It's been a good meeting. It's hard to have a conversation with 50 other people, but I think we did a good job of it. And let's give them a big round of applause.